Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so as you guys know, we are in the knockout portion of the Magnus Carlsen Invitational, part of the Champions Chess Tour. And so what they're doing right now is each group of players are matched up with one specific person. They're playing 2 matches of 4 different games. So they just got done with the first series of games today. And in the games between Wesley So and Alireza Firouzja, we have Wesley So won that first match. So basically he needs to draw. He needs to basically tie or just win tomorrow. And then he'll be making it into pretty much the final. I think there's like 8 players left. So there's final 4. So there's going to be 2 more rounds, 2 more matches. But anyway, if I got my people from the Philippines, Maraming Salamat Po. I think it's a Sa. Nananud, Ing, a King Magai video. Appreciate it very much for coming by and stopping by, take a look at my video. My last video is doing extremely well for it to be pretty early. It's about 10 a.m. in the Philippines right now, so it's picking up a little bit, faster than some of my other videos have, so that's really good. So if I have anybody that is from Iran or who is Farsi or Persian speaking, I got Kaylee Sepas Gozaram. Appreciate it very much. Assalamu alaikum to you. Shukran, shukriya, and ma salama to you. Appreciate you coming by and taking a look at my video very much. And so if you guys are ready to go, let's go ahead and take a look, see what we have for this game. All right, so we got E4, we got C5. So we have the Sicilian defense, as you guys know. Knight to F3, we got D6. So these are pretty much going to be the most commonly played lines. Of course, you can have like D4s come in. You have like C3s, knight to C3s, bishop to C4s. Interestingly enough, I just figured this out. D4 in the database has been played 95,000 times. The second most common move, which is what we saw in the game today, which is the Canal attack, bishop to B5, has been played 16,000 times. So that is a gigantic difference between the top move played and the second top move played. It's kind of crazy. So that's why I always say, pretty much almost always you're going to see D4. So if you practice against D4 as with the Sicilian, you're going to be probably good to go. Anyway, so we have bishop to B5, which is the Canal attack. We got bishop to D7. Bishop takes D7, queen takes D7. We got C4. We have knight to F6. We got knight to C3. So we have like a Maroxy bind type situation coming here with the C4 and the E4 going on. So we see G6. We got D4. Pawn takes D4. Knight takes D4. Bishop to G7. We got F3. Queen goes to C7. So already you can kind of tell that we're going to start getting into the novelty here pretty soon because, we do have a second movement by the queen. It makes a lot of logical sense because, you're thinking about going, knight B to D7 possibly at some point. So you want to kind of clear it away. So we see B3, queen goes to A5. That's also a possibility. And this is all still theory. So we have bishop to D2. We got knight to C6. We got knight D to E2. We got castles by black, castles by white. And we have knight back to D7. And this is actually the novelty of the game now. So this is the first time we've seen it. 13 moves deep in a Sicilian. That's pretty legit. And as you saw before, white didn't really have a lot of good discoveries on this queen. And even now, we don't have like a whole truckload of discoveries. There's not a lot of attacks, you can kind of like put with this bishop here. So this queen is actually pretty safe on that square, even though it looks kind of crazy. The king comes to H1. We got knight to C3, and now you see knight to D5. And of course, you're not worried about this diagonal being opened. Because we are attacking the queen. So it's a legitimate thing. It's a legitimate situation here. Queen comes back to D8. We got bishop to C3. Now, of course, the queen moving, we have to protect against this exchange in the corner. So we got bishop takes D3, knight D takes C3. We got A6, because, we don't want any pesky knights jumping up in here because this would be a really nice square for him to get to. It'll make moving this e-pawn very, very difficult because, you can just snap it off. So we have A4. We got rook to C8. We got rook to B1. We always want to give, this pawn some protection because once we push the C-pawn and the A-pawn, the B-pawn is now backward. So as you can see, there's no pawns able to, there's no pawns able to like kind of support it. Plus, you want to move the queen at some point, right? So we got knight down to B4. We have queen to D2. We got E5. E5. It's not a bad move. The only thing, I mean, as you guys are familiar with, and you guys hear me talk about a lot, as far as Sicilians and stuff go, a lot of times when you push either e6 or e5, this d6 square can become very, very weak. So almost always you're going to see white pretty much win this pawn, and you're seeing black trying to see if they can, get a pawn, elsewhere. There's not really a lot to do because once you do push c5 in the Sicilian, you have to push the e-pawn at some point usually. So, that's always going to be an issue for you. Kind of like when you play the French, you're going to be pushing e6 and d5, and your c7, c8 bishop is going to be pretty sad, even though the French is a very strong defense to play as black. We got f4, we got f6, we got f5, so we got rook to c7, we got rook lift to f3. So it's getting kind of, juicy looking here, with this rook lift. So we got rook to g7, just making sure we defend against any discoveries coming up. So we see a5, which, of course, doesn't give the pawn away, because if we take here, we just take here. And that's where the problem child comes into play. So we got b6, pawn takes b6, queen takes b6. We got pawn takes g6, pawn takes g6. Now we have knight to d5. I mean, you have some problems here. You can always retreat the queen back here because you're looking at this square is kind of getting attacked. But, of course, that's going to be dropping the knight. I just realized that. So we can't do that. So we're kind of forced to trade here. Knight takes d5, queen takes d5 with check. King goes over to h8. And I mean, there's not really like, a good check here because the rook is just going to, protect that. So, that was the whole point of you putting this rook on this second rank here. So we got b5, we got a5 because, of course, this pawn is pinned. So, this rook is kind of like lonely in the corner or on the bottom part of the board, the back rank. So, we don't want to be, dropping that with check. We got b5. So this does give us a nice little pass pawn here. So that's a definite plus with the situation. We got rook to h7. We got knight to c3. King to g7. We have rook to d1. We got rook to d8. We got h3 because this file is a little bit vulnerable. With the king sitting here on h1. So we got rook to h4. We got king to h2. We got rook to d7. We have queen to c6. Trying to force this trade here. Of course, we can't just back up here because the rook is going to get deflected. We're going to take this pawn. So that's where that pawn comes into play. So we got queen takes c6, pawn takes c6. We got rook to d8. We got c7. We got rook to c8. We got rook takes d6. Rook takes c7. So we have rook f takes f6. So we have some pretty strong rooks here for white. So, I mean, we do kind of have like a little bit of a superior position here for white just because of the fact that, these rooks, coordinating with each other are doing some, some real damage to black's position a little bit. So the knight takes e4. We got rook takes g6 with check. We got king to f7. We have knight takes e4. Rook takes e4. We got rook d to f6 with check. We got king to e7. We got rook to a6. We have king to f7. Of course, we're not going to snap the pawn because we're going to lose our rook. So we're not doing that. So rook a comes back to f6 with check. King goes to e7. And then we see rook to h6. We got a4. Rook to a6 because now this pawn is getting just a little bit dangerous. So we don't want that to be, it just be like flying home. So we see rook e takes c4. Rook h to e6 with check. We got king to d7. We got rook takes e5. We have rook 7 to c6. Now I'm kind of flying through this a little bit quick because it's not like some major changes that are going on. And it's a pretty long game. It's like a 74 move game. So I don't generally do these long of games. So I'm kind of trying to get through it. I try to stay away from like the 25-minute videos. So just keep running through. So we got rook a to a5. Got rook to d6. Rook to a7 with check. We got king to c6. We have rook e to a5. Rook d to d4. We have rook 7 to a6 with check. We have king to b7. We have rook to g6, rook to e4, rook to b5 with check. We have king to c7. We have rook to f5. We have rook to b7. We have g4. So this is starting to get these, try to get these pawns rolling. And one of the main issues that you had, if you hadn't moved the rook over to f5, is the fact that, this king is going to be very unhappy because it's going to start getting walked down the board and it's going to get mated. So we definitely don't want that. So we have rook to c6, trading rooks here. Rook takes c6, king takes c6. We got king to g3, rook to e3 with check. We have king to h4. And this was actually like a pretty winning position for white. it actually required you moving down to G2, so that you can, you know, kind of do a little triangulation with your king and get into a superior position. So this rook doesn't have the ability to check, because as you see, this rook doesn't have checking distance, because the rook really should be kind of as far away from the king as possible, so that it's not subject to being attacked. You know, the king kind of walking towards it. So we see king to h4. A3 comes, so it's getting pretty dangerous for it's getting pretty dangerous right now, even though it is technically still a draw. So it's not like losing, even though you have this pawn like way down the board, because we do have an extra pawn for white. So it's pretty equal. King goes to b6. We see rook to a8. We got king to b5. We got g5. We have rook to e4 with check. We have king to h5. We have rook to a4. So as you guys know, as you guys remember me talking about in the video before, you have what's called the Lucena position. It's basically the key to all rook endgames. And basically what black is doing here is it's building a bridge. You know, it's trying to basically make it impossible for this rook to capture this pawn. So it's basically just kind of interfering with their rook. And it's just called building a bridge. Anyway, we got rook to b8 with check. King comes to c6. And now we bring the rook on the other side, rook to b1. We have a2. And then we have, of course, rook to a1. And even though it does kind of look like white is in a really, really defensive position, this is actually a dead draw right now. So I want to go ahead and stop the video here. And give you guys a multiple choice again. I'm not always going to be doing that, but it just happens to be like that right now. Okay, there are two moves. King to d7 and king to d6. One of them is a game-losing blunder, and one of them actually still holds the draw. So if you want to go ahead and stop the video right now and see which move, I'll light the thing up, which move continues to maintain the draw and what move completely just loses the game altogether. Go ahead and do so real quick. Okay, cool. So if you said king to d6, and this is actually what was played in the game, this will be a game-losing blunder. This does lose the game. So basically, if we run through what we looked at in the game, this allows white to actually take the opposition from black. It's a distant opposition. So this starts to get into kind of like some complicated in-game type concepts. You guys are familiar with opposition. It's a little bit lesser known as far as distant opposition goes. But the correct move, the correct response from white here is to actually take the distant opposition. Now, as you guys are familiar with opposition, you guys know that an odd number of squares between the kings and being on the same color gives you the opposition. So, you know, there's many different types. You know, there's direct opposition, there's distant opposition, there's diagonal opposition, there's like farther away diagonal opposition. It's all about like squares and rectangles and stuff like that. So without getting too complicated in there. Anyway, so we see king to e7, king comes to g3. We see king to e6, we have g6. And this is actually allowing the king to start hiding behind these pawns and continuing to push them. So we see king to f5. We got h4. We got rook to a7 with check. And then we see king down to h6. We have king rook to a6. We have king to h7. And this just, you know, it's more of the same. I mean, if you take the pawn here, you're still going to have this pawn to be able to push and win the game. So you see rook to a4. H5 comes. We see king to g5. And then we see g7. It is actually in this position that Alireza Firouzja does resign the game. Because like I said, I mean, even if you try to pin here, you're going to be moving the king up. And then, I mean, a check here is just basically just going to be turning into, you know, a promotion. And I mean, this is just an easy type of end game. I mean, you know, you can take here, and then it's just all about checkmating with the rook and the king, which, you know, I think quite a good portion of you guys know. So if we go back to the position that we had when rook did come to a1, the way to hold the draw is actually to go directly with your king. And the reason for this is because after king to d6, after king to d7, you would have king to h6, and it doesn't allow white to actually take the opposition. So it puts black in a superior position. Not a superior position, but in a superior enough position where they don't lose the game. So after king comes to g7, you have the ability now to check with the rook. And what this is actually going to do is it's going to either cut the king off this way or cut the king off this way and make it really, really hard to push these pawns, because now the pawns don't have the support of the king. Or it allows this king to kind of get up into this corner and make it really impossible for the king to, you know, hold, because if we had king to g8, king would come to e7. We see h4, and then the king would come to e6. And as you can see, this rook is now cutting off this king. So this king is going to be able to kind of get over and start to munch the pawns, and get itself in a position where, in connection with the rook, it can take the remaining pawns, and then it's just going to basically be held up into a draw. So that is how that went. And so sometimes it seems like if you just go the direct, it can be a game could be drawn. It can be like, just dead even, or just slightly losing, slightly winning. And then when you get into these types of end games, it literally comes down to what type of movement you make with your king. And so it's amazing to think that king to d6 is completely losing while king to d7 is holding the draw. But that's literally, when you get into an end game, is all it takes is you to accidentally move your king in the wrong, direction, or to move it to the wrong square, or just give the opposition up. As you guys are familiar with, like a king and a pawn versus a king, sometimes if you don't retreat to the correct square, it basically blows the game. So it's very, very important to understand in games, because you can literally play a beautiful opening, a beautiful middle game, and then not know how to handle a certain end game, and you've just lost the game, or just let the opponent draw. So end games are very important, guys. So anyway, I appreciate you guys stopping by. So I got, I'm gonna get this all the way. I got Kaylee Sepas goes around, and Mariming Salamat Po, King Magan, Kai Bagan. Appreciate it very much. Pa alam to you. And I think so. It's breakfast time. So, y'all almost out to y'all. Appreciate it very much, guys. And I will see you guys next time. All right.